Hey guys, Bill Ladd, Duckett Ladd CPAs and Advisors. I'm joined today with my partner, Jared Duckett. Today is April 2nd, 2020. And not only is it my partner's birthday, happy birthday, Jared.
Appreciate it.
Today is Paycheck Protection Program Eve. This thing came out last week at this time. They said they were going to have it ready by Friday. We've been spending all day talking to bankers who said, we're not ready, we're not ready, we're not ready. The Treasury Secretary Mnuchin came on and said, it's going to be ready. And we have data out there. And guys, after business hours today, right around 7 o'clock Eastern time, they dropped some interim guidance that gave us some clarification on some things. And what I'll say, guys, is this came out fairly recently. We spent a little bit of time kind of diving through it. We're going to talk about some of the high points. There have been some changes since we last spoke. There's still some ambiguity in there, but they did clear up a lot of the big questions. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick, and we're going to actually take a look at the document and kind of hit on some high points. So again, this thing came out about 7 o'clock Eastern time, and it was designed to basically give us the rules of the game. And so I'm going to kind of scroll through here. There's a lot of stuff that we only talk about, but the stuff highlighted, we're going to stop and spend a little time on. So the first thing I wanted to hit on is the applicability date. And basically what they're saying here is the interim final rule applies to applications submitted under the PPP through June 30, 2020, which is the date we knew. But a key phrase they use here, or until funds made available for this purpose or are exhausted. Guys, we have said it over and over and over. This is the billion-dollar crystal ball question that we don't know is how quickly do these funds go, and when they're gone, is that it? You know, we have heard that the Treasury Secretary, the SBA, both sides of Congress, I mean, everybody's committed to taking care of small business, but how committed are they? We don't know. You know, right now we have a finite pool is what we know of $350 billion to spend, and there's a lot of need out there. So that's the first thing we wanted to hit on. I'm going to kind of scroll through here, guys. Bear with me. This is the actual document itself. It's 31 pages. So there may be some blank screens, but we'll get to some good stuff here in a second. Okay, I wanted to stop here real quick. And Jared, what we were hearing is a lot of what was holding this up was where banks were scared to death. You know, after 2008, they had been held to such a high standard. They got sued like crazy. So they were scared, what if we have fraudulent loans? That's what we were hearing. This section here really seems, and down the road a little bit too, kind of gives them cover, it seems like.
Yeah, there's a lot of language in here, how I read it, that you know, kind of, I guess I'll use the word release liability maybe, but really lightens the pressure, if you will, on banks. I think they were scared first off of the liability, but then also the volume of loans that they were going to try to push through so quickly. This really alleviates that, and hopefully they can get a lot done.
Yeah, I think they were looking at a underwriting criteria that probably wasn't too different from some of their other SBA loans, which can take weeks to get through. So I think this is going to come as a welcome response or welcome guidance to the lenders. I think it should open it up a little bit easier for them to get their process and procedure in place. And again, basically what they're saying here is they're going to hold them harmless. So I think that's really going to expedite the process. I view that as a very good thing. All right, we're going to kind of go through here. Not much. If things are in here that have not changed, we're not going to hit on those, guys. Okay, I'm going to stop here real quick because this is really where they, in a very subtle way, kind of tell you what you need to have. There's really never a checklist that they give the lenders. They just refer, and we'll get to that in a second, back to what they previously have talked about. And so, you know, what they're wanting you to do is they're wanting you, first of all, to verify that you were in operation as of February 15, 2020. And then they want you to give payroll documents. The way I read this, Jared, is payroll processor records, probably like your payroll summary reports that you get, payroll tax filings, that'd be your 940s, your 941s. And then we're going to get into this in a second, but, you know, for 1099 workers, you know, who are eligible for this program, you know, they're wanting you to give 1099 forms, or if you don't have those, some kind of P&L to show that you're a sole proprietor. Do you have any comments on
Yeah,
thoughts
those
on that,
those
Jared?
payroll processor records will come directly from, if you do payroll yourself, they'll be basically your earnings reports for the year. If you outsource payroll to a provider, then they'll be able to get that information to you with your 941s and everything else that you file with the IRS. So a lot of that documentation will come from them or yourself if you do it yourself.
And the last sentence there is interesting. Talks about for borrowers that don't have such documentation. If there's a situation where perhaps your books and records aren't caught up, or if you're a sole proprietor and you don't have, any kind of 1099s yet, that may allow you to provide, bank statements or other things that will help expedite this process, so you're not struggling to get the money. Again, they want to push money out to Main Street. That's what this is for. Okay, let's keep kind of rolling down through here. Again, not much has changed in a lot of this. Here's one that's interesting, Jared. This is one that we've kind of talked around a lot. Most people who are listening to this probably went out and applied for one of those economic injury disaster loans. We were talking today, and through all of our contacts and our various dealings with the public, I've only we've heard of one person who's actually received a loan yet. So this right now makes it sound like the time period for when you get a loan that could be rolled up into it ends on April 3rd. And then you back off the amount of that $10,000 advance. But I don't know if we have a good answer about if you do get an EIDL after April 3rd, are you still able to refinance it into that? Do you have any guidance on that here?
I don't. The way I read this, though, is if you get an EIDL after, it doesn't get rolled in just because they specifically have those dates there. Just the big thing on that, if you get an EIDL and also get the PPP, is it can't go for the same. You can't double dip on costs. Yeah. But that's how I read it. I think they specifically put that April 3rd date to say anything after kind of stays on its own.
And not to mention, you can only have one PPP loan per business. So that would seem to be, unless they could do some kind of addendum, that may preclude it. So that's gonna result in some strategy. If you get an EIDL after this thing is approved, then we'll need to have a conversation, or you want to have a conversation with your accountant or your CPA. Okay, so they go through some really simple calculations here of how to calculate payroll. And I want to go up real quick and show something that I think is interesting. This is what they say up here is the following methodology, because they're asking how do you calculate your loan? That was always the $1 million question. What period do we use? They basically say which is one of the methodologies contained in the Act. So you take aggregate payroll cost from the last 12 months. So what you're going to see is this is going to be one of the contradictory pieces that we have in this document here that was hastily drafted. If you guys recall, the application called out the aggregate payroll costs being for the calendar year 2019. And later in the document, it seems like that is the date they're going to want lenders to verify against. But this statement right here may allow you to do a look back for 12 months, prior to this date. Again, there may be some guidance. That's something you'll want to talk to your bank about. We don't know the answer, but it's interesting that there's a little bit of a contradiction here, and we'll kind of touch on that down the road. Okay, again, there's some pretty simple calculations. They're pretty easy for you to follow here. They're kind of walking through. They do talk about what's payroll cost. Nothing's really changed there. They do come in here. This is something that I'll be honest with you, Jared, this next one, I want to get your take on it because I don't know if I understand it. We're talking about what is not payroll cost. And they have this section here, and they say federal employment taxes imposed or withheld between February 15th, 2020 and June 30, 2020, including employee and employer share of FICA, railroad retirement, and appears to be withholdings as well, federal withholdings. Jared, the only dates I know that correlate to 2/15/20 and June 30/20, I believe, are the dates that this program is supposed to be functional. I'm not really sure how that would play into a payroll calculation with those dates.
Yeah, I really can't follow that one too well. I'm sure there's some meaning to it. I hope. I just can't. If you look at payroll cost, and we'll get down a little further, we're kind of looking at the 2019 year. I'm not sure how these dates would affect that. So that I don't really have a good answer. I'm sure something will come to light on it, but I don't think it's really going to affect the calculation of payroll cost in total.
Yeah, unless for some reason you were able to use a date maybe that ended in March and goes back to the April of 19, and maybe a month and a half would be included in this. But again, something that you'll probably want to talk to your bank. Again, keep in mind the application itself kind of specifically calls it out as 2019, and that appears to be backed up later on in some rules here. Okay,
and
here's
that is one good thing, Bill. You mentioned the application. We haven't seen, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but since these interim final regulations have come out, I don't think I've seen any revision to the original application. I double checked it when this came out, but I haven't since. It really, you'll notice in this thing changed so quickly, you really have to try to stay up to date. But from what I've seen, the application hasn't changed.
I haven't noticed a change on that either. Okay, here's the big one, Jared. This is one that was giving us a ton of stress trying to figure out what do we do here. Independent contractors. Do we include them in our payroll costs, or do they claim themselves? And I think we got some much needed guidance here, and they basically called out and say, no, they are not included in your payroll calc. They have the ability to apply for that PPP loan on their own.
Yeah, that one's huge. That was, really all day today, I've kind of gone back and forth with clients, bankers, et cetera, on do you include it, do you not? And this is, you can't get more transparent than this. They do not count independent contractors for purposes of that payroll cost calculation.
So understand, guys, if you've done this payroll calc and you had those included, you may have to go back and revise it. And if you did, that's no fault of your own. A lot of banks we were talking about, even through today, were including that in their calculation. This appears to say no dice, you cannot include them. Okay, another change here, Jared. Right now, and they used a fancy 100 basis points, which to us lay people means 1%. If you recall, they had originally said no more than 4%. When we got the guidance of the application and the guidance, it said 0.5%, but apparently there were some complications with how that would really work with the bank and their lending structures. So it looks like they struck on a compromise with that 1%.
I think this is the only time I've ever seen where like doubling the interest rate isn't that big of a deal.
Right. 1% is still pretty palpable. So I think we should be good there, especially if it's forgiven. Okay. I'm going to keep kind of scrolling down through here again. 2 year, for the maturity, you can apply for, you can only apply for one loan. This one's interesting. We actually were hearing some chatter that you actually had to manually sign these things. Some banks were saying that they came to the logical conclusion that we're all sheltered in place and they don't really want people mingling. So e-signatures, e-consents should be available, should be allowed under this program. So that will make it a little bit easier there. This one, Jared, is this is another component of the $350 billion question. Is the PPP first come, first serve? And the answer is yes. What's your take on that?
Yeah, until exhaustion. I mean, it's, what I'm saying is, or I guess what I'm hearing and what I'm reading is, if you want the money, you got to go get it now. Who knows if they're going to add to the 349 billion? We're hearing chatter that they might, but it's not done until it's done, right? So don't count on it. If you need the money now, probably go try to get it. First come, first serve.
I mean, you certainly would like for them to have relieved a little pressure off the valve and maybe said, hey, try to keep a feeding frenzy from overwhelming the system. But to me, that's something that seemed, it's pretty important. First come, first serve. Yes. So keep that in mind, guys. That's a factor of the timing of the loan. The forgiveness provisions really haven't changed to our knowledge. They do say they're going to give more guidance. That's going to be a pretty complicated part of this whole thing. And, there's two different components of it that they really need to work out and give us some guidance. So I would say I think by April 23rd, they're supposed to have some good guidance on that. So hopefully we can kind of know all the rules by that point. And Jared, it was so important about independent contractors. They said it again. Yeah. They said it again. The same exact thing was G and P, I believe. So if there was ever any doubt, I think this wiped it out. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. You can't, two places, right? You can't question it now. It's there.
Right. Right. Okay. What forms do I need? This is a welcome relief. I mean, guys, we were putting out a bunch of stuff we were hearing that you need to pull together. For ours, we pulled together a bunch of forms. Seems pretty streamlined to me. You need to submit a form 2483. That's the application that we've seen. Have that filled out and ready to go. And payroll documentation described above. When Mnuchin came out and said, you take your form and your payroll documents, for your loan, I mean, he wasn't messing around, Jared. This is what it's sounding like he's expecting the lenders to get. The documentation above the stuff we talked about, your payroll summaries for the same period, your 941s, your 940s, your payroll returns. Just make sure that it all ticks and ties back and forth. We're auditors here at Duckett Lab too, so we kind of like stuff to tick and tie back and forth. The easier it is for them to see how you came up with your calculation, the quicker this thing will go.
That's right. Make it as easy as possible on that lender. Other things you might need, this says what forms do you need, but you probably will need a copy of your driver's license and stuff like that. Standard loan stuff, but the forms, it looks pretty clean. Not much you need to give them, but just make sure it is clean, easy to trace.
That's right. And it looks like they've kind of streamlined what the lender then has to do. They have a form that they have to fill out, and hopefully that gets you in the system, and then you are off to the races to see if you're approved. Okay, how can the loans be used? There's really nothing here, and we're going to kind of slide down here. Okay, I want to park here in the next section. This highlight, and then the next one, Jared. I'm going to hit both of them, and then we'll kind of talk about it. But this one says the administrator believes the finite appropriation. There's the finite word again. And the structure of the act warrant a requirement that borrowers use a substantial portion of the loan proceeds for payroll costs, consistent with Congress's overarching goals of keeping workers paid and employed. This kind of gets back to us saying that when you get these loans, you need to bring your people back. And they take it one step further, Jared. What you'll see down here is they really call this out. I mean, they understand that this is cheap money and that there's opportunities here. So they're really wanting to, in my mind, make this crystal clear. What if they're misused? If they're used for unauthorized purposes, they're going to direct you to repay them. And if you knowingly use these funds for unauthorized purposes, you could potentially be subject to additional liability, such as charges of fraud. And this is really interesting to me too, Jared. If one of your shareholders, members, or partners uses these funds for unauthorized purposes, then SBA will now have recourse against that shareholder. So all of a sudden, any non-forgivable portion, which if you use it for unauthorized sources, it would be, that was non-recourse, is now recourse against you and your assets. I think that's a big deal. I mean, this is them saying, guys, don't mess around. Do the right thing. Use it for your people and get them back into, let's get this economy kind of back and going. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty black and white. On the certification or the application, you are certifying that you are taking these proceeds, these funds to use for specified uses. Don't get creative here. Don't do something that's outside. Specifically use it for that. Don't put it somewhere else and try to play an arbitrage game or anything like that. Put it to the use it's for, and you should be in good shape. They're pretty blatant here. You do something wrong, I mean, there's consequences.
And what we don't know is what kind of direct tracing. Again, we're feeling that you can demonstrate that you spent this money through payroll and other things. In other words, we don't know exactly how deliberate you have to be about setting up separate cash accounts, something like that. I mean, there's nothing that tells us you have to do that, but you do have to be prepared to prove out through documents that you paid at least this amount on payroll and these other items. So that's an important component that we want to make sure that we're following there. Not much has changed here. Okay, I'm gonna sit here real quick on what do the lenders need to know. There's a lot of things that it was designed to kind of give them some cover. So this is really what is going to open it up where they feel more comfortable. But I want to stop right here. What do they need for underwriting, Jared? And basically, they want to get the certifications. In other words, they want the application of filled out, and they want it signed, and they want these people certifying what they're going to do with this stuff. They're going to need to figure out, do you have information demonstrating that a borrower had employees who had paid salary or payroll taxes on or around February 15th, there may be the need to provide a payroll tax summary for February, so you might have that handy. And again, here's where the contradiction we talked about earlier. They want them to confirm the dollar amount of average monthly payroll cost for the preceding calendar year by reviewing payroll documentation. So if you guys remember up earlier, it talked about, previous, it didn't really specify a time frame, previous 12 months, I think it said. Here they're kind of going back to what the application says, which is this is the prior year calendar year. That's how we did ours and all of our clients. We followed the letter of that rule. I think this almost tells me that's what they want to see. Again, there is some contradictory information there, but from what I can tell, this is telling us that it probably is going to be that December 30 timeframe.
Yeah, this is the calculation we were using 2019's payroll, where we hit on at the beginning, where it was talking about the methodologies. I'm hoping that was just kind of an example type. 2019 is how we're taking it as the calendar year for payroll costs.
Yeah, they kind of go through some just other general things here. Again, when they're doing it, they're telling them their underwriting is limited to reviewing the application and submit such documentation to establish eligibility. They keep coming back to payroll reports. That's a big deal. Again, if you're on that self-employed sole proprietor route, then you might need 1099 miscellaneous or things like that. But for the most part, for most of you guys out there that have a small business, have your payroll records handy. That's really what they're going to be looking for. Again, not much has changed here. Interest rate is that 1%. That is another thing there. But other than that, Jared, I believe that's kind of the extent of the big changes to this. The rest of it, we'll kind of scroll down here to the very bottom. And yep, that's all we got. That's everything else pretty much shook out the way that we thought it would. And it seems like they did a decent job of answering some of these questions that were really causing a lot of stress for taxpayers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they got it. You mentioned PPP Eve, right? I can't even say it right, but they delivered this just right in the nick of time, and not a ton of changes. I mean, they did, 1% interest rate. That was probably the one, but I think the biggest one is independent contractors. It's pretty black and white on how that's treated now. And, authorized use of funds, make sure they're used for the right thing. Those are some of the big ones. But I think that it's good guidance, probably could have got a little sooner for us. But I mean, you got to think about this program and how quick they turned a lot of this stuff around. It's actually pretty remarkable what they did. So hopefully the lenders like this and they're ready to go.
The SBA is not built for speed. They're right. a slow build kind of operation. So, for them to turn around, I mean, give them credit for that. What I will say, guys, is I think we have to be prepared and be patient. First off, if you feel like you made a mistake in your calculation, probably not the end of the world. See if you can't get it fixed, get it corrected, talk to your banker. But also understand these banks have to set process and procedure in place around this. I promise you, the ones we've been talking to are working around the clock trying to get this and do it well and do it right. So they probably deserve a little grace through this process. It is going to be a little bit of a mad dash. Everybody's going to try to get in. So, guys, again, I think the thought process is try to make it as easy and as simple as possible and make your banker's job as easy as it can be so they can pretty much punch it in, push a button, and you're in the system. And then then it's time to wait and see, right, Jared? See how the approval process works.
That's right. One thing that wasn't in this guidance was how long till you get your money. We'll see how that works. But I think, the big thing is be nice to your banker right now. They are working overtime. Do everything you can, possible to get them documentation that's easy, but be nice to them. They're putting it in and they're working hard for you.
All right, guys. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully this is the last PPP video we ever do, Jared. I'm so sick of this stuff. I'm ready to move on. But if not, we will keep you posted. Hopefully it goes well. Hopefully your process goes well, guys. Good luck. Happy Paycheck Protection Eve. Jared, happy birthday, brother.
Appreciate
Guys, we will see you next time. Hang in there and take care.